Nora Whitlow had both hands between a screaming woman's knees when the first hard grip of her own labor caught hold of her spine and twisted. She did not cry out. She bit the inside of her cheek, tasted blood and stale coffee, and told the rancher pawing holes in his hat brim to fetch more hot water before he made himself any more useless than he already was. The bedroom at the Bellamy Ranch smelled of lye soap, sweat, and wet wool steaming by the stove. Wind worried the shutters, though the August night was warm. Mrs. Bellamy was small, and the baby was not, and when Nora pressed one steady hand to the straining belly, she felt at once what the trouble was. The child was turning wrong. Across the room, Dr. Owen Pike snapped shut his black case, too offended to hide it. "She ought to go into town," he said. "I told you that 2 hours ago. And she'd have died in the wagon," Nora answered without looking up. "Now put your pride somewhere out of the way and hand me that clean towel." Owen Pike stood there in his fine city coat with dust on the hem and contempt in the corners of his mouth. He was a handsome man in the polished, useless fashion of men who mistook being listened to for being wise. He glanced once at Nora's swollen middle, then smiled that thin smile he saved for her. "You ought to be home in bed if you mean to keep that child." Mrs. Bellamy cried out again. Nora set both hands where they needed to be and lowered her voice until it became the kind women obeyed because it left room for fear to leave. "That's it, June. Breathe when I tell you. Push when I tell you. You are not losing this baby tonight. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are and let us know in the comments what corner of the world you're listening from tonight. Stories like this always feel warmer when we know who's by the fire with us." Then come right back, because Nora Whitlow was about to do what half the county claimed no woman in her condition had any business doing. She worked by touch and timing, not panic. 2 fingers, then 4, a turn no larger than the width of a prayer. Mrs. Bellamy's nails bit into Nora's forearm. The rancher made a broken sound in his throat. The baby shifted under Nora's hands at last, then came fast, wet and furious, into the room with a cry so strong it seemed to startle the lamp flame. Mrs. Bellamy began to sob. Her husband dropped to his knees beside the bed as if somebody had kicked them out from under him. Nora wrapped the child, laid her on her mother's breast, and only then let herself breathe through the sharp band of pain tightening low in her own body. Not yet, she told it. She had lived too long around pain to imagine bargains worked on it, but sometimes speaking to it still helped. Owen Pike stripped off his gloves 1 finger at a time. "If this county had sense," he said, "it would stop mistaking luck for skill." "Luck didn't save her," Nora said. His eyes flicked to the leather satchel hanging from the back of the chair. That satchel held her birth ledgers, 20 years of names and dates and weights and blood loss, and which doctor arrived sober and which did not. Most men saw old books. Owen Pike saw a noose being braided, page by page. At the door he paused. "My father is meeting with the board in the morning. They mean to close your birthing house and open a proper ward above the bank. Bring those ledgers if you want the privilege of defending yourself." Then he was gone, taking his cologne and his spite with him. June Bellamy, pale with relief, touched Nora's sleeve. "Don't go alone tomorrow." Nora smiled for her sake. "I never do." That was a lie, and the room knew it. She stepped out onto the porch an hour later with the Bellamy child's first cry still ringing behind her and the night air cool against the sweat drying at her neck. The moon lay thin over the cottonwoods by the creek. Her mare stamped once at the hitch rail. Down the lane a lantern bobbed wild and fast, and by the time Nora understood it was a person running, not riding, the lantern had guttered out. A woman came up the steps half bent over, one hand pressed under her ribs. Marta Alvarez had flour dust in the seams of her skin and blood on the front of her dress, dark even in the weak moonlight. She was newly widowed, though nobody yet had the courage to call her that out loud. "They killed Tomas," she said, catching the porch post before she fell. "Mr. Pike's men beat him behind the livery because he found something in the bank office. I took it. I didn't know where else to run." From beneath her shawl, she dragged a narrow ledger bound in cracked green leather. Nora knew that book before she even touched it. Owen Pike kept it locked in his surgery desk. Not the public ledger with proper seals and neat lies. The private one. The one with women's names in a tighter hand and numbers written in margins where numbers had no place being. A wagon rattled on the road beyond the cottonwoods. Too quick for honest travelers. Marta's face went paper white. "Nora," she whispered, "if they get that book, No one will ever prove what they done. Nora looked from the road to the blood on Marta's dress to the hard line of the county seat lamps 3 miles off, where men in pressed coats meant to decide in the morning whether the town midwife, who had delivered every baby in Cottonwood County, should be allowed to go on breathing usefulness into the world. Then another contraction took her, stronger this time. She braced one hand on the porch rail until it passed. Nothing was going back after that. By the time Elias Boone arrived, the kitchen fire had been built up, Marta's cut lip had been cleaned, and Nora had hidden Owen Pike's ledger under the loose board beneath the flour bin. Elias came through the back door smelling of horse, leather, and the faint iron scent of the jail keys he always kept on his belt. He had a sheriff's badge on his vest and a blacksmith's hands below it, broad enough to look dangerous even when they were trying to be gentle. The first thing he noticed was the blood on the towel by the basin. The second was Nora's face. "Who's hurt?" "Marta," Nora said. "Tomas is dead. Harlan Pike's men are likely looking for what she brought me." Elias crossed the room to Marta, crouched despite the ache in his bad knee, and spoke so softly the lamp had to lean to hear it. Marta told him what little she knew. Tomas had done odd jobs at the bank stables. He had seen Harlan Pike and Owen arguing after dark, heard the words state inspector and maternal deaths, and later found the green ledger shoved beneath a feed sack. Someone saw him take it. He never made it home. Elias closed his eyes for one slow second. "I can move you both out before dawn." "No," Nora said. His gaze lifted to her at once. There were years in that look. Years of almost, and not yet, and too late. She had married him last winter in the little clapboard church with only 6 witnesses and a pie cooling on the sill afterward. 2 people long past the age of foolishness, everybody had said, which was the town's way of admitting they'd wept at the sight. "Nor. No," she said again, quieter. "If I run tonight, Pike wins tomorrow. He'll get the county money for that ward, bury whatever is in the ledger, and tell every widow and every frightened girl from here to the river that the only hands allowed to touch them are his sons. I won't hand him that." Elias took off his hat. The line along his jaw tightened, then eased. "You're hurting." "I'm breathing." "That is not the same thing." It was not. She knew it. He knew it. The child inside her had chosen a dangerous hour to begin knocking. Nora had been 23 when Owen Pike first told her she was broken. Her first husband, Ben Whitlow, had ridden through sleet to fetch him when labor turned bad. Owen arrived late, impatient, smelling of whiskey and bay rum, and saved neither Ben, who froze on the road home, nor the little girl Nora never got to hold alive. Afterward, he stood at the foot of her bed and said in a voice smooth with practiced pity that some women simply were not built to carry safely. For 17 years, she believed him. She learned herbs and hands and timing from an Arapaho woman north of the creek and an Irish widow who had buried 3 children and half the men who loved her. She built the birthing house room by room above her kitchen. She brought babies into the world for women who could pay in dollars and women who paid in turnips, mending, or a promise to send broth when winter came. She did it because grief had left an empty room in her, and service filled it enough that she could bear the echo. Then Elias Boone, whose own wife and son had died under Owen Pike's careless care while Elias was away escorting a prisoner over the pass, began stopping by with hinges to fix and firewood already split and long silences that did not ask to be filled. Love came on them late and honest, and without performance. By the time Nora realized she was with child in the spring, she had sat down right there at her kitchen table and laughed until she cried, because the body that cruel men had pronounced finished had decided otherwise. Out in town, women loved the story. Men called it providence if they liked her and foolishness if they did not. Harlan Pike called it opportunity. Marta sat wrapped in one of Nora's quilts, trembling whenever wagon wheels passed on the road. Elias checked the windows, the back lane, the stable. Every few minutes he glanced at Nora's hands, as if he could tell by the way she held the kettle whether the pains were closer. "They'll say I'm choosing you over the law," he said finally. Nora lifted a strip of linen to Marta's lip. "Are you?" He let out a breath through his nose. "No, I'm choosing law over the men who have been wearing it like a stolen coat." Marta began to cry without sound. Nora knelt carefully in front of her despite the pull in her back and took her cold flour-rough hands. "Listen to me. Women like us get called stubborn when all we've done is survive longer than expected. You came here alive. That counts for something. We'll make the rest count too. That line settled over the room and stayed there, the way true things do. Outside, a rider went by too slow for chance. Then another. Then quiet again, which was worse. Elias stood beside Nora while she packed her satchel with clean cloths, laudanum, scissors, thread, and both ledgers now wrapped in oilskin. "There's still time to go south to my sister's place," he said. "I can bring Marta behind you. We could send the books on to the inspector from Cheyenne and leave every woman here to Pike's mercy while we wait on men in offices." Nora shook her head. "No. Tomorrow we put those books in front of the whole county." He touched the back of one finger to her wrist, the smallest thing, but after all the years she had spent being careful with loneliness, it nearly undid her. "Then I'll keep the road open." The church bell struck midnight. On the second stroke, somebody threw a stone through the front window. Glass burst across the floor. Marta screamed. Elias had his pistol out before the last shard stopped skidding. Nora did not move fast enough anymore to be graceful, but she was still quick where it mattered. She snatched the lamp off the table before the curtains could catch, shoved Marta low behind the stove, and heard from the yard a man's voice call, "Bring the green book and maybe the house stays standing." No answer came from Nora, only the sound of Elias stepping onto the porch and drawing a line in the dark with his voice. "Next man up these steps dies on them." The riders wheeled away laughing, but dawn would come. And with it, the county board, Harlan Pike, Owen Pike, and whatever passed for justice in a town where powerful men loaned each other money and names. If it had been you, with a child turning under your ribs and danger already pacing your yard, would you have run before sunrise or stayed and forced the whole rotten thing into daylight? Tell me true in the comments, because by 4 in the morning Nora had made her choice, and there was no soft version of it. They left in the dark with no lantern lit. Marta lay under blankets in the back of the wagon, the ledgers beneath her, while Nora sat upright on the bench, trying not to show Elias how often she had to breathe through her nose and count. The sky was the color of old tin. Sage brushed the wheels. Somewhere off toward the north pasture a coyote barked once and stopped. They took the creek road to avoid town. For a mile it worked. Then a shot cracked the morning open. The mare screamed. Elias hauled the reins. Another bullet slammed into the wagon's side. Nora dropped flat across Marta as the third tore through the seat where her shoulder had been a second before. "Down!" Elias shouted. There were 3 riders on the rise, silhouettes against paling sky. One she recognized by the set of his shoulders. Owen Pike did not ride like a rancher or a soldier. He rode like a man born certain other men would die in front of him if necessary. Elias fired once. A horse reared. The wagon slewed sideways into the ditch, one wheel splintering. Nora hit the floorboards hard enough to drive air from her lungs. Then warmth flooded between her thighs. For one unreal second she thought she'd been shot. Then she knew. "My water's broke," she said, almost calm with it. Marta made a frightened sign of the cross. Elias looked as if someone had reached into his chest and closed a fist around his heart. No time for fear. No room for it either. Elias cut the mare free, dragged the ledgers out, and half-carried Nora toward the old schoolhouse on the ridge, abandoned since the new one went up in town. Bullets chewed dirt around their boots. Marta stumbled beside them holding her side. Owen Pike's voice floated after them, maddeningly mild. "You can't keep both, Nora. The books or the baby. Choose." Inside the schoolhouse, dust and chalk and mouse droppings caught in Nora's throat. Light came in through cracks between the boards. Elias shoved a desk against the door, another against the side window. Marta sank onto the floor, then gave a strangled gasp and clutched her belly. Nora turned her head sharply. "How far along are you?" 8 months, Marta whispered. "Maybe more." Pain hit Nora again, deeper, grinding through bone. She pressed one hand to the floor until the plank grain bit her skin. When it eased, she crawled to Marta, laid a palm on her belly, and felt the hard wave there. "You've been having pains. Since the livery. Why didn't you say?" Marta looked at her with the shame men teach women too young. There was too much else. Outside, boots in the dirt. A fist against the door. Then Harlan Pike's voice, old and smooth as oiled leather. "Mrs. Boone. Sheriff. Bring out the property stolen from my son, and I'll allow this foolishness to finish without blood." "Tomas was not your property," Nora called back. Silence. Then Harlan again, colder now. "A Mexican stable hand and a meddling midwife are poor weights against a bank, a doctor, and a county office. Elias cocked his pistol. Good thing we brought truth to make up the difference. The first shove hit the door like a wagon tongue. Dust drifted from the rafters. Nora was measuring her own contractions now, whether she wished to or not. 7 minutes. Then 6. Marta was 4 minutes and frightened enough to make them worse. Owen Pike spoke next, close enough that Nora could picture the clean line of his part and the contempt under his nails. You always did mistake yourself for important. Do you know what was written in the report after Ben froze? That if I'd attended sooner, the outcome might still have been the same. Might, Nora. But you preferred the drama of blaming me. Something inside her went still. Elias looked over. What is he saying? Nora kept her eyes on the door. He told me my body failed. He told me I'd never carry again. A laugh from outside. Owens, your body didn't fail. My schedule was crowded. I had Senator Willoughby's daughter tearing in two at the hotel, and your man was already half dead from the storm when he found me. I made a practical choice. I do not apologize for practical choices. For years, Nora had carried that wound like a brand someone else had talked her into calling fate. Now, in the stale dark of a dead schoolhouse, while labor took her by inches and a young widow shook beside her, the brand changed shape. It stopped reading broken and started reading lied to. The door shuttered again. Elias, she said, her voice suddenly level. Shoot the lamp oil. He understood at once. He kicked over the dented tin can by the teacher's desk, fired through it, and flame leapt bright along the threshold boards. The men outside cursed and stumbled back. Smoke began to climb. Nora grabbed Marta's wrist. There's a cellar hatch under the alphabet rug. I taught here one winter. Help me. They dragged it aside. Elias hauled up the iron ring. Cool, damp air rushed up, smelling of earth and old potatoes. One by one they dropped through, just as another shot shattered the side window above. The cellar was low and black and crowded with forgotten slates. Smoke filtered after them in thin gray ropes. Nora crouched with a hand at the base of her spine and finally allowed herself one brief, furious thought. Owen Pike had stolen 18 years from her and called it medicine. Then the baby inside her drove downward with terrible purpose, and above them someone kicked through the burning floorboards. That was where the night hung, by flame and breath and breaking wood. When Nora opened her eyes again, she was lying on a potato sack in the root cellar with Elias's folded coat beneath her head and his hand wrapped around hers so tightly their rings pressed together. The fire above had moved on from roar to crackle. Dawn light came in thin through the vent grate. They were alive, which felt less like safety than a task unfinished. Marta moaned from the corner. Her labor had settled into that low animal rhythm no woman fakes and no man forgets once he's heard it. Elias had blood on one sleeve, not his own, and soot smeared across his cheek. You were out a minute, he said. How many pains? 3, maybe 4. Then stop looking at me like a grave and listen. She turned toward Marta, walked her through the breathing, checked the child's position by touch, and found the baby mercifully head down. Elias held the lamp and did exactly what he was told, which was one of the reasons she had loved him from long before she admitted it. He did not need to be the cleverest man in a room to be the best one in it. Between Marta's pains, the cellar grew quiet enough for memory to come creeping. Nora stared at the dirt wall inches from her face and said, all those years I thought God closed that door on me. Elias wiped sweat from her upper lip with the corner of his bandana. Looks to me like a man lied and you paid for it. My whole life turned around a lie. He was silent a moment. Then he reached inside his vest and brought out a tiny wooden horse no longer than his thumb, smoothed by years of handling. I carved this when Rose was carrying. Meant to set it on our boy's shelf. Kept it in my pocket after they died because I did not know what else to do with my hands. Nora looked at the toy, then at him. From inside her satchel, she took the little pair of lambskin booties she had never managed to throw away, one of them still faintly smoke-scented from the schoolhouse fire above. The sight of them made her throat lock. For a long time, they simply sat there with the dead children between them and the living ones still trying to arrive. Then Elias said the line that would follow Nora for the rest of her life. Home ain't the place you hide your hurt, Nora. It's the place your hurt stops having to knock. She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pressed the tiny booty into his palm. He closed his fingers around it, as if receiving something sacred. Marta cried out. The moment broke clean. Nora moved back into work because work was holy too. Good. Good, that's it. Don't fight the pain. Use it. An hour later, Marta's daughter came into the world in the cool, dirt dark with Elias holding the lamp, Nora guiding the head, and sunrise sifting gold through the vent grate above them. Marta took one look at the baby and began weeping into her hair. Nora laid the child against her breast and felt the sharp burn of wanting so fierce it almost frightened her. Then her own body answered with a contraction that bowed her double. Elias was at her side instantly. Tell me. Too soon to push. She swallowed. But not by much. Smoke had thinned. Voices still moved outside, farther off now. Men were searching the ruins for books they would not find. The ledgers lay wrapped in oilskin beside Nora's hip. Proof. Memory. A county's worth of women written into permanence by the one profession men praised publicly and dismissed privately. Nora braced herself through another pain, then looked from Marta and the baby to Elias and the soot-streaked dirt around them. If this is getting to you, if your chest is tight and your eyes are stinging a little, then you are exactly the kind of soul this story was made for. A like and a subscribe tell us to keep bringing women like Nora into the light. She smiled faintly after saying it, as if hearing the tenderness of that thought from some future porch where this night had already become memory. Then the smile vanished. Help me up. We're going to town. By the time they reached the county courthouse, the sun was full over the square and half the town had gathered because fire, scandal, and power never failed to draw a crowd. Nora rode in sitting straight despite the labor wrenching through her every few minutes. Marta held her newborn beneath the wagon cover. Elias walked beside the wheel with one hand near his holster and the other on the tailboard, as though he could keep the whole thing from tipping by will alone. Harlan Pike stood on the courthouse steps with his silver watch chain gleaming. Owen was beside him, immaculate again somehow, as if men like that shed shame with their ash. The county board had lined up under the porch in black coats. Reverend Sloan worried the same hat brim he'd worried at 3 funerals and a flood. Mrs. Bellamy from the night before stood near the hitch rail with her fresh baby in her arms and murder in her tired eyes. Well, Harlan called, loud enough for all to hear. Our midwife arrives late, in damaged condition, escorted by the sheriff as if she were state business. Have you come to surrender my son's stolen property? Nora climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. The movement nearly dropped her to one knee, but she caught herself on the wheel and straightened. Sweat ran down between her shoulder blades. Dust coated the back of her throat. She carried the green ledger under one arm and her own brown birth book under the other like a preacher carrying 2 testaments. I've come, she said, to show this county why neither you nor your son should ever be allowed near another laboring woman so long as either of you draw breath. A murmur went through the crowd, quick and electric. Owen smiled thinly. In your condition, Nora, I'd advise less dramatics. In my condition, she said, I advise you to keep your mouth shut and pray. Elias stepped onto the bottom stair. Board members, before any vote takes place, I am entering evidence of fraud, extortion, falsified death records, and conspiracy to obstruct a state medical inquiry. I am also swearing before witnesses that Marta Alvarez was murdered in furtherance of those crimes. Harlan laughed. On whose testimony? A hysterical pregnant woman, a Mexican widow, and a husband too love-struck to know his oath from his bedpost. Nora opened the green ledger. On yours, eventually. She did not rush. That was the power she had learned from birth work. Panic belongs to the weak hand. Calm belongs to the one who means to finish. She read names first, not numbers. Women. Ada Rook, bled 12 hours, charged for surgery not performed. Celia Dunn, baby stillborn after delayed attendance. Death recorded as God's will. Banknote collected from widower 3 weeks later. Rose Boone, obstructed labor, doctor absent at card table, child listed malformed to avoid inquiry. At that, the square went absolutely still. Elias did not move. Only his jaw tightened once. Then Nora opened her own ledger and matched dates, times, witnesses, blood loss, weather, which husbands were sent for help, and when they returned. She had written it all because women disappear too easily once the sheet is pulled over them. She had written it because grief makes clerks of some of us. Mrs. Bellamy stepped forward first. Then old Mrs. Fry with her cane. Then Ruthie Cobb carrying the boy Nora had turned from breech 10 years before. One by one the women of Cottonwood County came closer, each with a child on a hip, by the hand, or grown tall enough now to stand beside them. Living proof. A whole generation Nora had caught and slapped and wrapped and set crying under this sky. You asked what weight stood against your bank, Nora said to Harlan Pike. Looks like most of the county. Owen lunged then, not at Nora, but at the ledgers. He caught one edge of the green book before Elias moved. Fast, brutal, clean. Elias drove him against the courthouse post, twisted his arm behind him, and the doctor made a sound less dignified than anyone expected. But Harlan Pike was quicker in his own way. He snatched the marshal's revolver from the belt of the youngest deputy in the confusion and pointed it straight at Nora's belly. Drop the books, he said. Now. The square froze again. Somewhere a horse clinked bit against teeth. Nora could feel the baby descending inside her with that same terrible certainty as before. One more pain, and it would be time whether fear liked it or not. This was the last measure of Harlan Pike. Not just greed. Not just pride. Control so complete he would put a bullet through a laboring woman in public before letting power leave his hand. Nora looked him in the face and saw, maybe for the first time, how frightened he really was. You can shoot me, she said softly, but you cannot shoot every woman here who knows what you are. And that, more than Elias's badge or the law or the crowd, was the thing that beat him. Not luck, not rescue. A truth earned over 20 years of service. Men like Harlan Pike ruled only so long as women stood apart with their shame arranged neatly. Nora had spent her life entering their pain into the record. Now the record had become an army. Mrs. Fry stepped forward with her cane. Try it. Then June Bellamy. Then Marta, white-faced and shaking, holding her newborn against her breast with both arms, and still somehow standing straight. Then another woman, and another, until Harlan Pike found half the square walking toward the gun instead of away from it. His hand shook. Elias took that moment, kicked the revolver free, and drove Harlan face first to the courthouse steps. Not a rescue. A consequence. What followed happened fast. Deputies changed sides once they saw which way the town had turned. The board demanded the ledgers. Reverend Sloan, whose cowardice had always been mostly social rather than moral, began praying loud enough to sound useful. The state inspector, delayed by a washed-out bridge and arriving at last in a dust-coated buggy no one had expected before noon, found a square full of witnesses and 2 bound Pikes waiting for him like gifts from Providence. Then Nora's knees buckled. They carried her into the county clerk's office because it was the nearest room with a lockable door and a cleanish settee. She refused Owen Pike's touch so violently no one tried again. Mrs. Bellamy boiled water. Mrs. Fry barked orders as if born to command governments. Marta, hours after her own labor, sat at Nora's shoulder and wiped her face with a cool cloth. You know what to do, Elias said, though his voice roughened on the last word. Nora caught his wrist and put his hand where the child was crowning. His eyes went wide, then wet, then steady. Yes, she said, and so do you. The pain was past language now. All sound narrowed. Breath, sweat, cloth tearing under her grip. Elias counting because she needed counting. Nora bearing down not against suffering but through it, through the lie Owen Pike had planted, through the grave of the child she never held, through every year she had watched other women become mothers while telling herself service would be enough. Again, she gasped. He bent close, forehead to hers. You're near. Again. Fire. Pressure. The world splitting for mercy. Then all at once it gave way. A child slid into Elias Boone's shaking hands with a cry so fierce the clerk's ink bottles rattled on the shelf. A girl. Red-faced, outraged, perfect. Nora laughed before she even meant to. Laughed with tears already running into her hair. Elias was weeping openly now, not caring who heard. He laid the baby on Nora's chest, and for a moment every broken thing in the room was rearranged around that one warm weight. She's ours, he whispered, like a man learning a new language and finding out it was his own. Outside the courthouse, the town kept moving toward justice. By sundown, Harlan Pike's bank had been sealed, his ledgers taken, his land claims frozen pending inquiry. Owen Pike was stripped of county privileges before the week was out, then taken in chains to answer for fraud, negligence, and Tomas Alvarez's murder. Once one of the stable boys decided prison for silence was a poor bargain against freedom for speaking. The birthing ward above the bank never opened. The building was later turned into a widow's residence with rooms that looked west into the evening sun. Nora named the baby Eliza Rose, for the women they had lost and the one they had become. Marta stayed at the birthing house through autumn and learned enough tending to serve as Nora's apprentice when winter roads went bad. Mrs. Bellamy organized meals for every laboring woman too poor to keep chickens fat. Mrs. Fry appointed herself guardian of propriety and of anyone trying to frighten Nora out of working before she was ready, which proved the more useful office. As for Elias, he kept the badge, though now folks said it sat differently on him. Straighter, maybe, or lighter. A man can carry law better once he stops mistaking obedience to power for duty. Months later, when the cottonwoods had gone gold and the sharp smell of apples drifted up from the root cellar, women still came to Nora's kitchen at all hours with pains, fear, or hope tucked under their shawls. Sometimes Eliza Rose slept in a basket by the stove while her mother coached another child into the world. Sometimes she did not sleep at all and announced herself to the county with a voice big enough to shame crows off the fence. Folks liked to ask Nora if it felt strange, after delivering every baby in Cottonwood County, to have delivered her own at last. She would smile, smooth the blanket over her daughter's kicking legs, and say, "Some mercies take the long road because they mean to stay." On clear evenings, Elias carried the baby out to the porch after supper, and from the rise above the house the three of them looked small and golden there together, the lamp behind the window, the cradle rocking slow, and the last light resting on Nora's bowed head like a hand that had finally learned how to bless. Next time, stay close by the fire with us, because we're telling the story of a deaf woman sent to a remote cattle ranch because her brothers were ashamed of her, and the half-blind rancher who saw the truth of her before anyone else did, who drew on him. It was August sun. The boardwalk boards were already throwing up heat you could see shimmering. And Cole Hadley, who had not seen properly since he was 9 years old, put a .45 round clean through a tin can at 40 paces because he heard the teaspoon click against the cup at the rim of a tin plate, and somewhere beyond that, a man had shifted his weight the wrong way. That's how it always went for him. The world was made of sound. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We love knowing who's with us. Cole was 43 years old by then. 6'1", shoulders the width of a barn door and a way of standing in a room that made strangers uneasy before they understood why. He didn't squint. He didn't tilt his head. He worked the right side of every face and every street like a man who knew exactly what was there. And the working of it came off as confidence so steady it made people lower their voices around him without knowing they'd done it. He'd been half-blind so long that nobody in the territory any longer bothered being polite about it. They called him Half-Eyed Cole when they thought he couldn't hear them, which they always thought, which was always wrong. Behind his back, they shortened it further. So far as the rest of the world was concerned, every Cole who had ever lived had been half of a man. It had been his name for 34 years. It was the name on the wanted posters he carried in his saddlebags, posted by sheriffs who did not recognize his face, because he had never used it to threaten anyone. He didn't lean on it as a wound, not anymore. He had gotten past that somewhere around his 20th birthday, in a line camp on the open desert, when he had made the choice to stop practicing the things he could not do and start practicing the things his one good I couldn't help him with. He had gotten good, then better, then quietly famous, in the way that gunfighters used to be quietly famous, which was to say by word of mouth among men who carried the same kind of trouble. He had been hired this morning by a woman in the town of Larkin. She had written him a letter that said only, "Come. I will pay what you ask." His usual answer to those letters was no. This one, he had read 3 times by the trail. The paper smelled of sage and wood smoke and something faintly citric he could not place. He had folded it and put the letter inside his shirt and ridden north. Larkin sat in a narrow valley where the land folded up against itself like a man bracing for a blow. There were about 800 people in it. The main street was 2 blocks of frame houses, a feed store, a smithy, a sheriff's office with a star out front that had been repainted so many times the star itself looked like a thumbprint. Cole had heard Larkin before he saw it. He had smelled it. Pine smoke and iron and the mud along the river, and the specific animal smell of horse sweat on men who had ridden hard and not yet stopped. He took a room at the back of the boarding house on the east end. He settled his saddlebags. He unpacked nothing. He sat on the edge of the bed with his holster loose on his thigh and listened to the town being a town. Somewhere 3 streets over, somebody was arguing over a horse. Somewhere east, a woman was calling children in from a yard. Down the street, the steady beat of a hammer on hot iron. He closed his right eye. He listened harder. This was the only thing he had ever been good at, and he had learned to make it last. His father had sent him out at 12. He had been walking the rim of a canyon at dusk, and a wild stallion had come up out of the draw, and Cole had pushed his little sister behind him with his whole weight. His face had taken the first kick of the horse. The right eye had never come back. The sister had grown up. The father had not been able to look at him in the mornings for a year, and then had been able to look at him only as half a son. Cole had been sent to live with a farrier who had taught him the listening trade of the trade. A man who shoes horses by ear alone has to hear the footfall of every animal in a string. Cole had never been the same as the other boys in town again, and he had given up trying to be. Until this morning, the last letter he had answered was one from a cattle buyer 2 years before, asking Cole to find a missing rider in the foothills. Cole had found the rider in 2 hours, by the displacement of a meadowlark that had nested near wherever the man was bleeding out. The buyer had paid him double and had not asked him how he did it. The woman who had written the letter came to him that evening. Her name was Marta Alvarez. She was 36 years old. She had a daughter of 8 named Lily who walked half a step behind her mother's skirts wherever they went. Marta had inherited her husband's small cattle operation on the south end of the valley when he had died of a lung sickness 2 winters before, and she had been fighting for it every day since, and the fight was nearly lost. She told him this in a voice that did not shake. It did not shake because she had spent 2 winters learning how to keep it from shaking. There was a difference, Cole could hear it, between a voice that had never shaken and one that had learned how not to. She laid it out. A cattle baron by the name of Harlan Voss owned almost every acre between here and the foothills. He had been buying land quietly for a decade. Now he wanted her 240 acres because they sat on the only stretch of river that watered the southern range. He could not buy them from her. He had offered twice. He had offered 3 times. Now the loan her husband had taken against the place, the loan she had been paying down honestly for 2 years, had somehow doubled. The paper her husband had signed did not say what she remembered it saying. A man named Briggs, who kept the books for Voss, was willing to swear it did. The land would be sold at auction in 11 days. Cole sat in the chair across from her and listened. He did not sit the way men usually sat in parlors. He sat forward. His elbows rested on his knees. He heard Lily's breathing in the hallway. He heard her hold her jaw tight when her mother said the words twice doubled. He said, finally, "I would like to see this paper." Mara brought it. He held it close to his left eye. He read it slowly. The words were right. The numbers in the man's hand were wrong. He had spent 30 years reading hands he did not trust, and a forgery has a particular way of pressing the pen down on the upstroke and lifting on the downstroke, and Briggs's hand had not done that. Briggs had done the opposite, which meant Briggs had been thinking about it, which meant Briggs knew exactly what he was doing. "If you bring this to a judge in the territory capital," Cole said, "they will read what is in writing, not what she remembers." "He is the only judge for 40 miles, Mara said, "and he has dined at Voss's table every month of his life." Cole did not answer. He folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. "I am not a lawyer. I am not bringing this paper to anyone. I didn't bring you here for that." She leaned forward. "I brought you here because in 11 days, they will come for the land. They will come for my daughter. And the man they have sent to do it is a man you have already faced twice in your life, and both times he walked away." Cole looked at her. His right eye was the bad one. His left eye fixed her quietly, deep brown, very still. "Tell me his name." She told him. She had known, though she did not know she knew. Cole made no sound. He set his hands on his knees and listened to Lily breathing in the hall. The girl was holding her jaw tight exactly the way her mother was. He said, "I will need 11 days. Then, after a pause, the sum you offered me is too much. Send half of it to the orphanage in the next town. I will take the rest in trade, in the form of letting me live." Now, what would you have done in her place? She had written to a stranger, offered him money she didn't have, to defend a piece of ground against a man with a small army. Would you have trusted him? By morning, the work had begun. Cole rode out to Mara's ranch. He rode the perimeter alone for 1 full day, listening. He learned the river by the sound of it sliding over rocks in different sections. He learned the barn by the low whistle of wind through a broken shingle. He learned which slopes would mask a horseman's approach and which would carry the sound of his approach for half a mile. He placed Lily and Mara in the front room of the house, where he could hear them from any corner of the property. The day after, he rode to town. He went into the feed store. He went into the smithy. He went into the saloon where the men who worked for Voss drank in the afternoons. He listened. He learned 3 things. First, that Briggs was afraid of his own boss. Second, that there were 4 men who would ride at Voss's word. Third, that the sheriff in Larkin, a man named Doane, had a daughter who had been refused work at Voss's table and had never forgotten it. Cole did not approach Doane. He approached Doane's wife, with a tin of cinnamon from his saddlebag and a story about a cousin who had been helped by a woman in Larkin years ago. He waited in the wife's kitchen. Doane came home at sundown. It took 40 minutes. Cole laid the paper on Doane's table. He did not explain it. He explained what had been done to it. Doane was a man who had been half a sheriff for most of his life. A man whose authority had been rented out by Voss every November when the cattle moved south. He was, Cole understood, a man who had been waiting years for a way out. Doane said, "I will ride to the territory capital myself." Cole said, "You will not. You will ride to my camp east of the river and wait there. I have other work for you." Doane's mouth opened. Doane's mouth closed. Doane nodded once, and Cole understood he had met the man's nerve and it held. Why would he send the sheriff away? Because Cole had understood, listening in town, that Doane's presence in Larkin during the auction would be the thing that held Voss's men in check, and Cole needed Voss's men on the road, away from the ranch, for the 11 days he had to prepare. That was how a half-blind man made a fight. He did not go looking for the fight. He changed the shape of the ground it had to happen on. The auction was on the 11th day. Cole stood in the back of the courthouse square. He wore a black coat and a flat hat, and his holster hung low and tied at the thigh. The sun was blinding even through his left eye. He did not squint. Harlan Voss came in a buckboard with 2 men on horseback at his shoulders. He was 63 years old. He had a small, careful mouth. He had eyes that looked like buttons. He did not look at Cole at first. He spoke with the judge's clerk. He spoke with Briggs. He looked up once. He said, "You are Hadley." Cole said, "I am." "You came a long way to lose." Cole did not answer. He listened. Beneath the square, beneath the talk, he heard the 4 horses Voss had brought to the edge of town. He heard the hammers on Voss's men's guns draw back when they slid into place. He heard Briggs swallow. The judge came out. Cole stepped forward. In his right hand he carried not the loan paper but a second paper, a deposition Doane's wife had witnessed, in which the sheriff had sworn he would testify to what he had seen on Voss's books. Cole laid it on the judge's bench. The judge read it. He did not look at Voss. The judge closed his eyes. Voss said, "What is that paper?" "That," Cole said, "is a paper that says you stole a widow's land, signed by the man whose job it is to keep you from doing it." He paused. "He is waiting at my camp east of the river if you want to verify it yourself. He is not riding back until this is settled." Voss laughed. It was a small, careful laugh. "You are a half-blind man in my town, and you are giving me papers." Cole said, "I am a half-blind man on your square, and you are about to owe me a duel." The gunfight happened at noon the next day, on the same square. The whole valley came. They came in wagons. They came on horseback. They came on foot from the farms along the river. They came because the widow had kept their cattle alive when nobody else had, and because Harlan Voss had been pressing on them for a decade, and because a half-blind man had come to town and, without raising his voice once, had built a wall out of nothing but sound and stubborn patience. Cole stood with his back to the iron column of the courthouse porch. The sun was overhead. He could hardly see. His left eye, his good eye, watered in the white light. He closed it. From then on he saw nothing. He listened. There were 3 men. He could not tell from looking how they were placed. He could tell from sound. Briggs was 10 paces to his left, on the porch. The 2 hired men were below the porch in the dust, maybe 12 paces, one slightly forward. The buckboard driver sat his horse to the east, on the road. None of those mattered unless they drew. He waited. The wind moved once. A bird flew out of a tree. Then the whole square was still. Briggs drew first. Cole heard the leather clear the holster before his eyes would have seen a hand. His own hand moved on the sound alone. The .45 went off. Briggs went down. The 2 hired men drew almost together. Cole pivoted on his left foot. He could not see them, but he could read the placement of their boots by the dust cracks and by the direction the sound came from. He fired twice. One round hit the rail of the porch. One round hit the shoulder of the lead hired man. The other hired man bolted. Cole did not shoot him. He listened to him go. When it was quiet again, Cole lowered the gun. He stood still. He had one round left. He did not need it. He did not know yet that anyone was dead. He would not know until someone came up and touched him on the arm. Lily came. She had pushed through the line of people. She had been holding her jaw tight enough to bruise herself. She reached up and took Cole's left hand. She said, "He's alive. Briggs is alive. He's breathing." Her voice cracked on the second sentence. "I wanted him to die." Cole did not answer right away. He let her hold his hand. He listened to the girl's breathing slow down. He listened to the square settle. He listened to Mara, somewhere behind him, begin to cry without making a sound. He said, after a long time, "Today I heard him better than I ever heard anyone." If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going. Voss did not leave Larkin that night. He left in the morning. He left with his buckboard and one hired man and the second hired man on a stretcher in the back of the wagon. He had paid Doan a sum he had never paid him before. He had signed a paper releasing Mara's debt before he would leave, and he had signed a second paper, held by Doan, that said he would not return to the valley for any reason without the sheriff's permission. He never used the second paper. He used his teeth on it. He chewed it up and spat it on the road east of town and rode on. He had lost too much to return. Briggs was taken to the doctor in Larkin and lived. He would limp for the rest of his life. He would not work for Voss again. He would, before the year was out, give testimony against 3 other ranchers whose books he had helped to forge. Mara kept the ranch. She raised her cattle that summer on the river. She paid back the debt in full. She wrote a letter to Cole every spring for the rest of his life, on paper that smelled of sage and wood smoke, and he answered every one with 3 words, "I hear you." It was the best answer she ever got. Cole stayed in Larkin through the winter. He took the back room at the boarding house. He taught Lily to listen to the river and tell him, by the sound alone, how high it had risen overnight. He taught her to read the wind-up on the ridge in the morning and know whether it would turn by noon. He gave her his good habit. He did not give her his wound. By spring, he had a small house built at the north end of Mara's property, just inside the tree line, where the wind came down soft and the sky looked close. He sat on his porch most evenings. Mara brought him coffee. Lily brought him the day's news, written in careful letters on scraps of brown paper, about cattle and weather and which neighbor had been kind that week. He had not married. He had lived at a careful distance. It was the kind of distance a man keeps when he has spent his whole life being told he was half of a thing, and he is not yet sure he is allowed to be whole. Mara understood. She did not push the distance closed. She filled it with coffee and letters and the slow, patient warmth of a woman who had learned to love one man and was willing to learn again on her own terms. 2 years and a season later, on a bright morning in early summer, Cole was sitting on the porch. Lily was 10 years old by then, and her brother, the one Cole did not yet know about, was 3 weeks old and asleep in Mara's arms inside. Cole was holding a mug of coffee in his left hand. His right hand rested on Mara's shoulder where she sat beside him on the steps. The sun was on his good side. He did not squint. Somewhere down the slope, a meadowlark. Lily came running up the path with the morning paper from town in her hand. Cole did not see her coming. He heard her boots on the gravel, and the way her breath caught when she ran, and the crisp paper crackle in her grip. He said, "Slow down, girl." She slowed. She laughed. She handed him the paper. She sat on the step below him, at his feet, and read him the morning from the front page. He took a sip of coffee. He listened to her voice. He listened to the meadowlark. He listened to the baby breathing in through the window behind him. He listened to the river, way down at the bottom of the valley, working its way over its rocks. He figured that was what whole sounded like when it ever came to find you. Next, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman who was sent to a remote ranch because her family was ashamed of her, and the blind rancher who could see her worth from the moment she arrived.